When the machines started shaking, they screamed. Not from fear, from disbelief. It was a warm morning in May 1945, in the flat, endless fields of Iowa. The sun rose slow and heavy over Camp Kearney, a U.S. military installation turned into a prisoner-of-war site. The air smelled of soap and diesel, of laundry steam and cornfields. Inside the cinderblock building marked Wash House 3, a dozen German women stood in silence, their boots slick with water, their faces pale with exhaustion and mistrust. Then, the machines began to move. Metal drums, big as barrels, rattled and spun. White foam poured from the corners. The women flinched, some backing away, one crossing herself instinctively. The Americans laughed, but not cruelly, more like they couldn't believe the reaction. The guard that morning, Sergeant Dorothy Lane, leaned on the doorframe and shouted over the roar of the washers. "Don't worry, they don't bite." A woman with a sharp, anxious face, later identified as Helga Muller, 24, nurse's assistant from Hamburg, pointed toward the row of machines and asked through the interpreter, her voice trembling. "Where are the women who do this work?" Dorothy smiled, then pointed at the machine and said, "Right there." No one spoke for several seconds. Then one of the prisoners laughed, too loud, too brittle, the kind of laugh that comes when you don't know what else to do. The others joined in, though some looked almost angry. They had never seen anything like it. Back in Germany, laundry meant cold basins and iron tubs, knuckles red from scrubbing, the sting of lye soap in open skin. You worked until your wrists ached and your breath came out in steam. But here, in this strange, humming room in America, you put the clothes inside, closed the lid, pressed a switch, and the machine did the rest. For a moment, everyone just stared. The spinning drums made a sound like distant thunder. The smell of detergent was almost sweet, too sweet, like something artificial. In later interviews, Helga would recall. "We thought it was a joke. No one believed it at first. How could a country fight a war with machines that wash clothes for them?" The interpreter, a young Iowa schoolteacher drafted for language duty, tried to explain how the washers worked, how electricity turned motors, how gears made the barrels spin. Most of the women didn't listen. They watched the glass windows in the machines, mesmerized by the way the fabric danced in the soapy water. When the first cycle ended, Dorothy opened the lid. Steam rose, filling the room with warmth. She pulled out a white undershirt, spotless, soft, still warm to the touch, and draped it over a chair. The women moved closer. One reached out and touched it, then quickly pulled her hand back. She whispered, "We knew." Like new. Dorothy shrugged. That's the point. Something shifted in the air. The laughter stopped. They weren't mocking anymore. They were looking at the machine as if it were something sacred, or something dangerous. Outside, the world was still broken. Europe lay in ruins, cities turned to ash. Many of these women had come from hospitals or communications units, not the front lines, but they'd seen enough to know what collapse meant. They'd walked through hunger, watched trains filled with refugees and wounded, felt the vibration of bombs even in their sleep. And now, after all that, here they were, prisoners, standing before a machine that did their labor better, faster, without pain. It wasn't humiliation. It was revelation. The room grew hotter as the day went on. Sweat ran down necks, the smell of soap thickened. A few of the women began to help, hesitantly, at first, following Dorothy's instructions to sort whites and colors, to measure the powder from the brown sacks marked, U.S. Army property. The machines kept spinning. The noise was constant, hypnotic. At noon, Dorothy brought in sandwiches and milk. The Germans sat in a corner, eating in silence. Through the open window they could see the American women outside, soldiers too, but laughing, sun on their bare arms, clean uniforms pressed and bright. They looked, to the prisoners, not like conquerors, but like people who had never known dirt. Helga whispered to the woman beside her, "If they live like this, how could we ever win?" The woman didn't answer. She just stared at the spinning drums and said, "Maybe we weren't supposed to." Later, one of them, Gisela, from Dresden, approached Dorothy. She gestured awkwardly at the controls and asked, "How long?" Dorothy frowned. "How long what?" "How long it takes." Dorothy checked her watch. 30 minutes, give or take. Gisela blinked. 30 minutes, for all this? She pointed to the line of uniforms piled on the table. Dorothy nodded. Gisela laughed softly, shaking her head. "It took us all day." All day. The sound of the washers filled the silence that followed. 30 minutes. It wasn't just a number, it was a glimpse of a world measured differently, a world where time itself had value, not just survival. By afternoon, the fear had melted into fascination. They began asking questions. Could these machines wash blankets? Sheets? Did every American home have one? Dorothy laughed again. "Not yet," she said, "but soon." That word, soon, stayed with them. As dusk settled outside, the machines kept spinning. The room glowed in the amber light of sunset, the smell of soap heavy in the air. Some of the women sat quietly, watching the final loads turn. When the last cycle ended, Dorothy unplugged the machines, one by one. The room went silent, except for the ticking of metal cooling down. The sudden stillness felt strange, almost hollow. Helga looked at her hands, clean, soft, no cuts, no blisters. She rubbed her thumb against her palm and frowned, as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. She said softly, almost to herself, "Work without pain. It feels wrong." Dorothy didn't understand the words, but she caught the tone. She paused, then said gently, "You'll get used to it." Helga didn't reply. She was still looking at her hands. Outside, the last light faded over the Iowa fields. Inside, the washers stood still, gleaming under the bulbs, their metal skins already cooling. By the end of the day, the machines kept spinning, in their heads, in their memories, in the questions that had no answers yet. And none of them, not even Dorothy, knew that something had begun to shift, quietly, beneath the hum of those machines. Something that no one could unlearn. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Back home, soap meant frostbitten fingers and water that smelled like iron. In Iowa, it smelled faintly of flowers. By June 1945, the routine had settled into the camp like dust. Reveille. Head count. A slow walk past the cornfields to the long, low building where the washers never slept. The sign above the door said, "Laundry Company B," but inside it felt like another country, warm air, the hum of power, order without shouting. The women learned the rules quickly: sort whites, measure soap, never touch the drum when it spins. There were over 10,000 female prisoners across the U.S. that year, nurses, clerks, radio operators, the invisible army behind the war. In Iowa, they became laundresses. They were fed 3 times a day, allowed letters, even Sunday rest. The guards called it Geneva treatment. The women called it impossible. The first days passed in silence. Then curiosity took hold. They watched the American women who ran the laundry, sleeves rolled, lipstick perfect, hair tied back with red scarves. At noon, they crossed to the base cafe, drank coffee, and laughed like peace was something you could pour into a cup. From the laundry window, Helga whispered, "They look like us, but cleaner." One afternoon, Sergeant Robert Henson, the young guard at the gate, handed out forms for evening English lessons. Most ignored him. But a few folded the slips into their pockets. That night, under dim bulbs, they learned 3 words from the blackboard: work, water, warm. The sound of them stayed in their mouths, soft and strange. Martha kept a small notebook hidden under her mattress. In shaky handwriting, she wrote, "We washed for war. Now, for peace." She stared at it until the paper thinned under her hand. The laundry became routine. The hiss of steam, the rattle of drums, the clean smell that clung to their clothes. Gisela, who once washed sheets for hospitals in Dresden, said the machine sounded like a heartbeat, steady, relentless. Some of the women began to hum along with them. Others covered their ears. The noise reminded them too much of engines. They were given small pay slips, a few cents each week, and permission to buy postcards at the PX. They chose ones with cornfields and wide skies, but most never wrote on them. What could they say? That America smelled of soap and silence. That the guards were polite. That the work didn't hurt. Once, Gisela asked Henson, "Why do you have machines for everything?" He thought, then said, "Saves time." She frowned. Time for what? He shrugged. Not working, I guess. She laughed softly, but the sound wasn't happy. For years, she'd believed labor was survival. Now, she wasn't sure what to do with a day that didn't wound her hands. On Sundays, Dorothy Lane, the American sergeant, let them open the windows. The wind carried the smell of grass and freedom, both out of reach. A few women sat by the machines even on their rest day, just listening. One said it calmed her. Another said it reminded her of the ocean. At night, the barracks went dark, but the sound of the washers lingered, a phantom hum in their ears. Some said it was music. Others said it was the echo of everything they'd lost, spinning endlessly. Helga couldn't sleep. She kept turning her palms in the faint moonlight. They were soft now, smooth, unbroken. The scars that once defined her had faded. She whispered to the ceiling, "If work doesn't hurt, how do we know we're alive?" No one answered. Morning came with the whistle's sharp cry. The women returned to their stations, faces clean, movements automatic. Dorothy held up a torn shirt and said, "Fix first, wash after." The phrase stuck with Helga, repair, then cleanse. Maybe that was what the Americans were really doing here, she thought. Repairing the world, one shirt at a time. Outside, a truck stopped at the gate. A soldier stepped down with a folder marked "New Transfers." The guards gathered, whispering. The phone rang once, then again. Inside, the hum of the washers drowned out the world. The women worked on, unaware that change was already on its way. Before the war, Gisela had worked in a laundry in Dresden. Her hands bled so often she stopped feeling the cold. Now, she pressed a button, and the machine did it for her. By late August 1945, Iowa's summer heat pressed down like a weight. The air inside the laundry shimmered with steam, the walls sweating. But the work had become smooth, almost graceful. The women moved between the machines with practiced rhythm, loading, folding, stacking. They didn't talk much anymore. The sound of the drums filled every silence. Each day began the same, the clang of the morning bell, a roll call, then the slow walk to Laundry Building 3. But something had changed. The guards no longer watched as closely. The women no longer flinched when the doors slammed. Even the smell, that strong, clean, chemical scent, no longer felt foreign. It was becoming part of them. That week, the Americans introduced a new rule: music during work. A radio appeared on a high shelf, its metal grill shining with grease and dust. The first song they heard was "Sentimental Journey" by Doris Day. The melody floated through the room like sunlight, soft, impossible, and unbearably kind. Some of the women stopped working just to listen. Gisela felt something tighten in her chest. For a moment she forgot the camp, the guards, the fences. The music made her see home, not Dresden in ruins, but the one she remembered, the bakery windows, the church bell, her mother's laughter before everything turned gray. When the song ended, she turned away so no one would see her face. At break time, Helga flipped through a copy of Life magazine that Dorothy Lane had left on the counter. A color advertisement showed a smiling American housewife standing beside a washing machine, her dress spotless, her hair perfect. The caption read, "Automatic washing machine, the modern miracle for the modern woman." Helga traced the woman's face with her finger. "Is she real?" she asked quietly. Dorothy shrugged. In some houses, maybe. The others laughed softly, but not cruelly. They all understood what it meant, that somewhere, this was normal life. Somewhere, women like them didn't have to survive to be seen. Later that afternoon, one of the women, Lotte, from Munich, was caught staring into the machine's spinning drum, lost in thought. "It's hypnotic," she whispered. "Like watching the world turn." Gisela smiled faintly. "Or like watching it wash itself clean." They all laughed, but the laughter ended quickly. None of them truly believed the world could ever be clean again. That night, after lights out, Gisela couldn't sleep. She opened her small journal and wrote one line. "We lost the war the day we forgot how to live." The words frightened her, not because they felt wrong, but because they felt true. The next morning, a delivery truck arrived from Des Moines, bringing supplies and, oddly, new uniforms. Not military gray, but light blue. Dorothy handed them out without comment. "You'll wear these starting tomorrow," she said. "Makes sorting easier." The women ran their fingers over the fabric. It was soft, almost elegant, the color of a clear sky. For a moment, no one moved. Then Martha folded hers carefully, as if it were made of glass. During lunch, Helga asked quietly, why would they give prisoners new clothes? "Because we're useful," Gisela said. "Machines need people to keep them alive." But she wasn't sure she believed it. That evening, a storm rolled in across the fields. The power flickered. When lightning flashed, for an instant every woman in the room froze, a reflex born from years of air raids. The thunder came late, deep and slow. The machine stopped mid-cycle. Silence. Steam curled upward like ghosts. For a full minute, no one spoke. Then Dorothy appeared in the doorway, holding a flashlight. "Don't worry," she said softly. "Power'll be back soon." But they weren't worried about the lights. They were afraid of the silence, that sudden, empty quiet that sounded too much like the ruins they had left behind. When the power returned, the washers roared back to life. The women startled, then laughed in relief. The drums spun, the song resumed on the radio, and the illusion of safety returned with the hum of machinery. Helga turned to Gisela. "When I go home," she said, "I'll buy one of these machines." "With what?" Helga smiled sadly. "Hope." The others laughed again, but Gisela didn't. She looked through the window at the darkening sky, streaked with lightning far off to the east. Somewhere across that horizon lay Germany, her street, her house, or what was left of them. She wondered if her old laundry still stood. If anyone there was still washing clothes by hand, bleeding into the water as she once had. The machines hummed louder, their rhythm steady and endless. Gisela placed her palm on the metal casing. It was warm, almost alive. She felt her reflection flicker in the curved surface, not a prisoner, not a worker, but something in between. She whispered, "It's washing more than clothes." No one heard her. But every woman there felt the same unspoken thought, that somehow, these machines were cleansing them too, scrubbing off the dirt of war one cycle at a time. Outside, the storm passed. The moon rose pale and clean over the Iowa fields. Inside, the washers kept spinning, steady, tireless, eternal. And for the first time, none of them wanted it to stop. The smell of soap filled the room, sweet, almost luxurious. One of the women burst into tears. She hadn't smelled anything that clean since before the war. It was October 1945. The corn outside the fence had already turned gold, the air sharper now, mornings edged with frost. Inside the laundry, the steam fogged the windows so thickly that the world beyond vanished. They might have been anywhere, a factory, a dream, a place where time had stopped spinning. Mary Collins, the American supervisor, arrived that morning with a wooden crate marked ivory. She set it on the table, pried open the lid, and the scent spilled out like a memory. "New shipment," she said. "Straight from Cincinnati." The women crowded closer. The bars were smooth, wrapped in thick white paper with blue letters. Gisela touched one with trembling fingers. "It smells like, before," she whispered. Helga asked if they could keep the wrappers. Mary laughed, but then saw their faces and nodded. "Sure," she said softly. "Keep them." For the rest of the day, the smell clung to the air, warm, creamy, too gentle for a place built on discipline. Some women tucked pieces of the packaging into their pockets, small ghosts of a world that had once been normal. At midday, Helga stepped outside for air. The sun was high, glinting off the silver washing drums. Across the yard, an American girl, barely 20, loaded laundry into a machine, then walked away to drink coffee from a tin mug. Her hands were clean, her stride unhurried. Helga whispered to herself, "She has time to live." That evening, the barracks were quiet except for the rustle of blankets and low voices. Then came an argument, sudden, sharp, cutting through the stillness. Martha slammed her notebook shut. "This is humiliation," she hissed. "Working for them, wearing their uniforms, touching their soap." Helga turned toward her. "And what would you rather do? Starve? Dig ditches? We're still alive." "That's the problem," Martha shot back. "Alive, but not proud." Silence. Then another voice, softer, from the shadows, Anna, the youngest. "Maybe it's not humiliation," she said. "Maybe it's the future." The words hung in the air like the steam that never cleared. No one answered. Outside, the night insects buzzed, indifferent. Inside, shame and relief twisted together until they were impossible to tell apart. Later, Gisela sat by the window, writing in her journal by candlelight. Her pen scratched slowly, "We are cleaner here than we ever were at home. Cleaner, and dirtier inside." She stopped, unable to finish the thought. Before lights out, Mary Collins walked through the barracks, checking stoves and windows. She paused at the doorway, listening to the women whispering in German, a language she didn't understand but could almost feel. She hesitated, then said quietly, "You're doing good work. You know that, right?" No one replied. But after she left, a few of them stared at the door, realizing she had said work, not service. The difference mattered. Over the next days, something shifted. The women laughed more, but also carried themselves differently, not with pride, not yet, but with something close to dignity. Still, the guilt crept in like the cold through the cracks of the barracks. Helga found herself washing the same piece of fabric twice, scrubbing until her fingers stung. "You can't wash shame away," Martha muttered behind her. But Helga kept scrubbing. "Then I'll keep trying," she said. The Americans watched quietly. Mary once told another officer, "They clean like they're trying to be forgiven." The officer only shrugged. Maybe that's what all of us are doing. By November, the war felt far away but never gone. Newspapers at the PX showed ruins, hunger, trials. The women saw the headlines through the glass and looked away. One afternoon, the radio in the laundry played a commercial, a cheerful voice boasting, "Ivory soap, so pure it floats." The women froze. The announcer's tone was bright, careless, American. Then laughter broke out, small at first, then louder, edged with something that wasn't joy. They laughed because they didn't know what else to do. That night, as darkness crept over the camp, the power suddenly went out. The machines groaned and died. The room filled with silence, real, absolute silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then someone whispered, "It's too quiet." They hadn't realized how much the sound of those machines had meant, the constant hum that filled the void inside them, the rhythm that made the world seem orderly again. Helga reached into the darkness and found the edge of a washer, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She whispered, "Don't stop." But it had. And in the stillness, they heard the thing they feared most, themselves. When the lights flickered back to life, she was still there, the American woman, crouched by the fuse box, grease on her cheek and a wrench in her hand. Not a soldier. Not an officer. Just tired and kind. Mary Collins wiped her palms on her khaki trousers, checked the humming fuse, and smiled. There, she said. Good as new. The washers roared back to life, drums spinning like nothing had happened. But something had. The women watched her, this woman who fixed things herself, who didn't wait for permission or help. Gisela whispered, almost in awe, in Germany, a woman like that would be called dangerous. Mary heard her and laughed. Dangerous? Only to broken machines. After the power returned, the laundry glowed again, warm light bouncing off silver metal, steam curling toward the rafters. But something lingered from that blackout, a sense of quiet intimacy, the fragile understanding that none of them, not even their guard, truly wanted the silence to return. That evening, Mary stayed behind to check the circuits. Helga brought her a tin mug of coffee, unsure if she was allowed to. Mary nodded her thanks, then said, "You don't have to help me." Helga hesitated. "Maybe I want to." The words hung between them, heavy, human. Soon, the others joined in, pretending to fold towels while sneaking glances at the American woman balancing on a stool, tightening bolts, hair coming loose from her cap. To the prisoners, it was a sight both foreign and magnetic, authority without cruelty, strength without shouting. Later that week, Martha approached her. "Why do you help us?" she asked bluntly, her accent sharp. Mary didn't answer right away. She looked around, the whirring drums, the folded linens, the faint smell of soap and sweat. Then she said, "Because someone has to wash all this away." She didn't mean the dirt. She meant the war, the hate, the wreckage, the weight. No one replied. Martha just nodded slowly, as if the sentence had landed somewhere deep. Over the next few days, the tension between the women began to soften. Mary stopped using her clipboard. She laughed more, cursed when she burned her hand on a hot pipe, shared stories about her life in Kansas before the war, a small town, a car that always broke down, a husband who'd never come home from Italy. "She's not strong like our officers," Gisela wrote in her notebook one night. "She's strong because she doesn't need to prove it." The next morning, Mary arrived early, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, and told them she'd be fixing one of the broken dryers. The women protested, it wasn't their business to interfere. But when she asked for a wrench, 3 hands reached out at once. Helga held the flashlight while Mary worked. The machine's inside was a maze of gears and belts. When it finally clanked back to life, everyone clapped, not out of duty, but out of admiration. Mary looked surprised. "Guess I did something right," she said, grinning. That afternoon, as the dryers rumbled and the scent of soap filled the air, the women spoke more freely. They told her about their homes, Cologne, Dresden, Hamburg, cities that no longer existed. Mary didn't judge, didn't pity. She just listened. Sometimes that was all they needed. Before lights out, Martha approached her again. "We were taught that American women only cared about lipstick and movies," she said. "You fix machines." Mary smiled faintly. "We can do both." It was the kind of answer that stayed in the air long after she left. That night, in the barracks, Helga couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Mary, her calm, her laughter, the way she spoke to them like equals. Helga wrote in her journal, "She's not strong like our leaders. She's just, free." The next morning, before dawn, the women lined up for roll call. Frost covered the ground, their breath came in small clouds. The guards counted heads, names, silence. Then, unexpectedly, Mary appeared beside them with a bundle of fabric in her arms. "Uniforms," she said. "You can wash your own today. If you want to." No one moved. Then Gisela stepped forward, took one shirt from the pile, and carried it toward the washers. The others followed. For the first time, they weren't working because they were ordered to. They were working because they wanted to. As the machines began to hum again, the women stood in a half-circle, watching the drums turn, their reflections spinning in the metal. It looked almost ceremonial, a quiet ritual of reclaiming something they hadn't realized was lost. Mary leaned against the doorframe, sipping her coffee, watching them. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The rhythm of the washers filled the room, steady, certain, alive. And for the first time, the women felt that they were washing more than fabric. They were washing themselves clean of the past, one cycle at a time. Someone brought a camera. They posed in front of the washing machines, 6 women in borrowed uniforms, laughing like it wasn't 1945. The flash went off, white and blinding. For a heartbeat, everything froze, the smiles, the steam, the soft hum of the dryers. Then came laughter, real and raw, the kind that cracks open something long buried. It was February 1946. Snow drifted outside the barracks, the last traces of winter clinging to the fences. The war had been over for months, but the camp still stood, quieter now, half empty. Most of the men had already been shipped home. The women were next. The Americans said the photograph was for records, but everyone knew it was something more. A final proof that they had lived, worked, and somehow, between soap and silence, found pieces of themselves again. Mary Collins arranged them in 2 rows, Gisela sitting on the edge of a washer, Helga leaning forward, Martha crossing her arms in mock seriousness. "Smile," Mary said. "It helps." Helga laughed. "Smile? After everything?" Mary shrugged. "Especially after everything." The flash popped again. This time, no one looked away. Afterward, the women lingered in the laundry, unwilling to return to the barracks. The air was thick with warmth and a faint scent of ivory soap. On the table lay a stack of folded uniforms, the last load they would ever wash there. Mary reached into her pocket and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. "For you," she said. Inside were small souvenirs, bits of tied packaging, tiny bars of soap, and one of the printed photos. "Keep it. So you remember, things can be clean again." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Gisela said softly, "It already feels like a different life." Mary smiled. "Then that's a good start." A week later, orders came. The women were to be sent to the East Coast for repatriation. Germany was divided now, some didn't even know where home was anymore. The night before departure, they gathered in the laundry one last time. The machines stood still, cold and silent. Gisela touched one of the drums, tracing the small dents and scratches left by months of work. "It's strange," she whispered. "They look like hearts that stopped beating." Helga found Mary outside by the fence, lighting a cigarette. "You'll forget us," she said. Mary exhaled slowly. "Not a chance." Helga smiled, half believing her. "Then maybe write us one day." "To where?" Mary asked. Helga shrugged. "Wherever clean things begin again." The next morning, before sunrise, the women boarded a truck bound for the rail station. Their new uniforms were pressed, their hair tied neatly under gray caps. Each carried a small bag, and in some, a folded photograph. Mary stood by the gate, waving as the truck rumbled away. She didn't cry. She'd seen too many goodbyes to waste tears on this one. But when the sound faded, she looked down at her hands, still smelling faintly of soap and oil, and whispered, "Be safe." On the road, the women passed the photo around. The edges were already creased. The 6 of them, standing in front of the machines, looked impossibly young, younger than they had any right to be. The silver drums behind them gleamed like halos. At the port in New York, while waiting to board the ship, Gisela turned the photograph over. On the back, in Mary's handwriting, were 4 words. From one woman to another. The ship's horn bellowed. Wind whipped across the deck, carrying the smell of salt and coal. Gisela pressed the photo to her chest. For a moment, she thought about dropping it, letting it fly away like everything else they were leaving behind. But she didn't. She tucked it into her coat pocket and held it there. When the vessel finally moved, the shoreline began to shrink, warehouses, cranes, a blur of gray and smoke. Somewhere in that vanishing world was a small laundry room in Iowa, filled with heat, music, and machines that never judged. Helga leaned on the railing, eyes fixed on the waves. "Do you think we'll ever have machines like that?" she asked. Gisela nodded slowly. "One day. Maybe that's the only thing worth rebuilding." The ship creaked, groaned, and pushed east into the wind. The women stood together, watching America disappear. In Gisela's pocket, the photograph fluttered slightly in the breeze, 6 women, white uniforms, silver drums. Behind them, faintly, the hum of a world that had already moved on. When they stepped off the ship in Bremerhaven, the air smelled of coal, rust, and dust. No band. No flags. No welcome. Only the low groan of cranes, the creak of chains, and the shuffle of boots on damp concrete. The war had ended a year ago, but the silence still felt occupied. The women stood close together, thin coats buttoned high, small bundles clutched to their chests. They had crossed the ocean in the belly of a ship that once carried tanks, and now, on German soil, they felt like ghosts stepping into their own ruins. A man in a gray uniform checked their names against a list without looking up. "Whiter," he muttered. "Move along." The truck south rattled over a landscape that barely looked like a country. Blackened fields, trees snapped in half, villages that existed only as chimneys. The road smelled of mud and smoke, and every few miles a sign pointed towards something that no longer existed: Leipzig 60 kilometers, Dresden 42 kilometers. At dusk, the horizon glowed faintly red, not from sunset but from the still-burning hills of the industrial east. Helga sat in the back, holding a small tin of soap she had hidden since Iowa. It still smelled faintly of flowers, of something gentle. She kept it closed, afraid that one breath of this air would kill it. When the truck stopped outside Dresden, she walked the last mile on foot. The city looked like the inside of a furnace, skeletons of buildings, walls cracked open, roofs gone. What used to be her street was only rubble and memory. Where her home had been stood a single stairway rising into nothing. She climbed it anyway. From the top, she could see the black scars where entire blocks had melted. The next morning, she went to the river to wash clothes, the way her mother had once done. The Elbe was cold, brown, and swollen with spring melt. Women lined the banks in silence, sleeves rolled, hands red from the water. The sound of scrubbing carried across the current, harsh, rhythmic, desperate. Helga knelt beside them. The first touch of the water felt like punishment. Her fingers went white, then blue. The soap she had saved crumbled between her palms. For a second, she closed her eyes and heard another sound, soft mechanical humming, warm water swirling in bright metal drums, laughter echoing in English. It was gone before she could breathe it in. Martha worked beside her, her face hollowed by hunger and winter. She said quietly, "They have machines that wash. We have ghosts that don't forget." Helga looked at her raw hands and thought of Mary Collins tightening a bolt with her bare fingers. The shame came like a tide, not at losing the war, but at realizing how much they'd never known. In the evenings, they gathered in cellars that smelled of coal and mold. Firelight flickered over broken bricks patched with hope. They boiled potatoes if they had them, weeds if they didn't. Sometimes someone found a newspaper, sometimes a letter from a husband who was never coming back. When someone played a harmonica, the sound cut through the damp like a memory of air. A week passed before Helga found Gisela again. She arrived at dusk, hair uncombed, face lined with smoke and wind. The two women stared at each other a long moment before speaking. There was no need for words. The weight of the Atlantic, the months of silence, the shared ghosts, all of it lived in that gaze. They sat beside the fire, listening to the wood pop. Gisela told them she had walked from Magdeburg. There was no work, no water, no glass in the windows. She had carried the photo all the way, the one taken in Iowa, 6 women laughing beside the machines. She kept it wrapped in cloth, afraid the rain would blur it. Helga touched the folded paper with reverence. It doesn't seem real, she said. It was real, Gisela answered. That's what makes it hurt. The room was quiet except for the hiss of coal. Martha poked the fire with a stick. We were told they were weak. That comfort makes people soft. But they were never weak. They were warm. The word lingered. For a moment, no one looked at each other. The idea itself felt dangerous. Finally, Gisela said, softly but clearly, if we ever build again, I want one of those machines. At first, no one spoke. Then a few heads nodded. Not in mockery, not in disbelief, but in something new. Agreement. Anna, the youngest, said, maybe warmth isn't weakness. Helga smiled faintly. Maybe it's how you start again. Outside, the wind carried cinders down the empty streets, and from far away came the echo of hammers, men rebuilding walls that would take decades to fill again with life. The fire in the cellar burned low, its light trembling on faces that looked both older and younger than their years. Gisela reached into her coat and touched the photograph once more. The edges were soft now, the ink fading, but she could still see the curve of the washer, the reflections of 6 women who had forgotten to be enemies for one moment in history. She closed her hand around it like a prayer. That night, before sleep took them, Helga whispered to no one in particular, if we ever build again. I want warm water. The others nodded in the dark. No one laughed. Outside, Dresden breathed, broken, waiting, but alive. Somewhere beneath the ash, the first sounds of hammers struck again, steady and sure, as if the city itself had remembered how to wash its own wounds clean. In 1953, on what was left of Königstrasse in Dresden, a small laundry opened between 2 bombed-out walls. The sign above the door was painted by hand, Freiheit Wascherei, Liberty Laundry. The owner was a woman of 40, her hair streaked early with gray, her fingers rough but steady. Her name was Gisela Reinhardt, though on an old American file she was still listed as Gisela Kohler, German POW, Camp Iowa, 1945. The street was half rubble, half rebirth. Across from her shop stood a bakery that sold bread twice a week, a shoemaker's stall built from tin and old bricks, and a tram stop that had no tram. Every morning, women carried baskets through the dust, their steps muffled by the ash still trapped between the cobblestones. And every morning, the smell of soap came from Gisela's door, faint at first, then stronger, like a rumor of better times. Inside, the laundry was small and bare, a wooden table, 2 iron tubs, a wringer salvaged from a farm. The walls sweated in summer and froze in winter. But the water ran, at least most days, and Gisela kept the place spotless. She worked in silence, sleeves rolled high, humming softly when she thought no one could hear, American songs she remembered without understanding the words. Sentimental Journey. I'll be seeing you. Her customers didn't ask where she'd learned such methods, the precise sorting, the soaking times, the careful use of heat. They only knew that clothes came back softer, whiter, somehow newer. Housewives whispered that she must have learned from the Americans. Gisela never denied it. She simply said, I learned from people who had time to care about clean things. By autumn, Liberty Laundry had become something of a meeting place. Women brought not only linen and shirts, but stories. They talked about ration cards, the new border, husbands gone missing, children growing up without shoes. In the corner, Gisela's young assistant, a girl named Lotte, kept the fire alive under the copper kettle and listened. Some afternoons the room sounded like confession, other days it was more like a prayer. In November, a journalist from the Sächsische Zeitung stopped by, curious about the American name. He wrote a small piece titled, Former Prisoner Brings Modern Laundry to Dresden. The article was barely 6 lines long, but for a week strangers came just to see the place. Some smiled at the irony, a German POW teaching other Germans how to wash, the American way. Others left quiet, thoughtful. Gisela didn't keep the clipping. She said it wasn't the story she wanted told. The one she kept was older, the photograph from Iowa. 6 women in borrowed uniforms, standing by rows of shining machines, smiling as if war had forgotten to exist. The edges had worn soft from years of being handled. Sometimes she placed it near the kettle while she worked, letting the steam smooth the creases. When customers asked who the women were, she'd say, "Friends. From another world." Then, one cold afternoon, a merchant from Leipzig brought her a crate. "Western goods," he said quietly. "Don't ask how." Inside was a miracle wrapped in straw, a small, second-hand washing machine, made in America. The paint was chipped, the cord frayed, but when Gisela turned the switch, the drum began to spin. The sound filled the room, deep, rhythmic, familiar. She stood perfectly still. The customers fell silent, watching her eyes fill before she could hide them. The hum was the same pitch as memory, the same note she'd carried in her head for 8 years. Warm water, turning, steady and human. When the first load finished, she lifted a shirt from the drum. Steam curled through the air, smelling faintly of soap and metal. For a heartbeat, she was back in Iowa, the heat, the laughter, the American sergeant tightening a bolt with grease on her hands. But now, the sound belonged to her. That night, she stayed after closing, sitting by the machine long after the fire died. The ticking of the drum cooling in the dark was like a heartbeat easing into sleep. She thought of Helga, of Martha, of Mary Collins. She wondered if they had survived, if they remembered. She hoped they had machines, too. In time, more washers arrived from the West, through traders, soldiers, cousins with connections. Dresden began to hum again, one house at a time. The women who once washed in the Elbe now had tubs that turned for them, water that ran warm. It wasn't luxury. It was resurrection. One customer asked Gisela why she had named her place Liberty Laundry. Gisela smiled, a slow, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "Because freedom," she said, "smells like clean clothes." The woman laughed softly, not understanding that it wasn't a joke. Late that evening, Gisela locked the door, hung her apron, and sat by the window. Snow began to fall, thin, quiet, forgiving. The machine stood beside her, humming faintly from its last load, a warm, steady sound in a city that had once known only silence. She took the photograph from the shelf, traced the outline of each face, and whispered their names like a prayer. Outside, the bells of a rebuilt church rang for the first time since the war. The rhythm matched the machine's gentle thrum, the sound of a world learning, slowly, stubbornly, to wash itself clean. 30 years later, a girl with dark hair and curious eyes opened an old cedar trunk in her grandmother's apartment in Dresden. Inside were folded linens, a cracked pocket mirror, and a photograph, 6 women standing before a row of shiny washing machines, laughing as if the world had never known war. On the back, written in fading ink, were the words, "For the day the world learned to wash itself clean." The girl, named Anna, was 16. She had grown up in a city rebuilt from ashes, with electricity that rarely failed and water that ran warm at the turn of a tap. She'd never known hunger, never scrubbed clothes in a river. For her, washing was just noise from the next room, a domestic heartbeat. She brought the photograph to the kitchen where her grandmother, Gisela, was measuring detergent into her machine, sleek, white, humming softly under the window. "Oma," Anna asked, "who are they?" Gisela paused. The years had gentled her face but not her eyes. She took the photo, ran a finger over one of the smiling women, and said, "That's me. And those were my friends." Anna frowned. "In America?" "In Iowa," Gisela nodded. "A long time ago. What were you doing there?" "Learning," she said simply. "How to be clean again." Anna didn't understand. To her, clean was a matter of soap and electricity, not salvation. But she saw something in her grandmother's expression, a quiet gravity that didn't belong to everyday chores. That evening, Gisela brought out a small wooden box from the shelf above the stove. Inside were relics of another life, a red cross card, a strip of faded cloth, and a metal tag stamped with numbers. She showed them one by one. I was a prisoner of war, she said softly. We washed American uniforms. We were angry, ashamed, and afraid. But they didn't treat us like enemies. They gave us machines that did the work for us. It felt like a miracle. And I hated that it felt like kindness. She smiled faintly, eyes far away. One of them, an American sergeant, Mary Collins, fixed the machines herself. I remember the grease on her face, the way she hummed while she worked. She told me, "You can't hate while your hands are busy making something clean." I didn't believe her then. But she was right. The washer clicked and slowed, the cycle ending in a sigh of steam. The sound seemed to fill the silence between them. Anna looked at the machine. "So that's why you called your laundry Liberty?" "Yes," Gisela said. "Because freedom isn't just big speeches and parades. Sometimes it's warm water after winter. Sometimes it's being able to start again." Outside, dusk gathered over the rooftops of a city reborn. Neon signs glowed along Königstrasse, trams rattled past with people laughing inside. None of them knew how the street had looked when it was nothing but dust. Gisela turned the photograph in her hands. "You know," she said, "when I first came back, I washed clothes in the Elbe. The water was so cold it made your skin crack. Every time I bent over, I thought of those machines, of how soft the water sounded in Iowa. I used to think the Americans won because of their guns. But now I know, they won because their world was already clean." Her voice trailed into the sound of the next wash beginning, the familiar rhythm of rotation, water rising, foam swirling. Anna sat quietly, watching her grandmother's profile in the dim kitchen light. There was something sacred about the scene, the hum of the machine, the scent of detergent, the peace that came from repetition. On the wall behind them hung a framed clipping from Sächsische Zeitung, dated 1953. Former POW introduces modern laundry to Dresden. Under it, a newer photo, Gisela with her employees, smiling in front of the bright, modern, Liberty Laundry. The paint on the sign was fresh, but the spirit of the old one lingered like perfume. Years later, after Gisela passed away, Anna inherited the laundry. She found, hidden behind the old American machine her grandmother had refused to replace, a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in uneven English. "Dear Miss Reinhardt. I hope this finds you. I still remember that day the power came back and we fixed the fuse. The war took many things, but not kindness. Mary Collins, Fort Dodge, Iowa, 1947. Anna read the letter 3 times. The paper trembled in her hands. She looked around the shop, the hum of the new washers, the smell of soap and ironed cotton, the faint echo of voices from the street. The air itself seemed alive with continuity, decades of women, enemies turned teachers, fear turned into care. That evening, she placed the letter beside the old photograph, framed them together, and hung them on the wall. Customers would ask who the Americans were, who Mary Collins had been. Anna would smile, just as her grandmother once did, and say, "They're the reason we know what peace sounds like." And at night, when the city settled and the last load finished spinning, Anna would stand in the doorway and listen, to the rhythm of water turning, to the quiet breath of a machine that had once bridged 2 worlds. Outside, Dresden's lights shimmered on the river. The city, washed and rebuilt, hummed with the same low, eternal pulse. Wars, she thought, are fought with guns. But peace is built in small rooms that smell of soap and warm water.